what type of experiments are actually available out there for us as researchers to look at the social phenomena that we are investigating or at individual human being phenomena that we are looking into? Well, the answer is there is a number of them, and let's have a look at all of them to make sure you understand the difference. First, there is such a concept as an experiment versus a quasi experiment. The experiment sometimes is also called a true experiment. That does not mean that a quasi experiment is not an experiment, but it just has a very different characteristic. Another option which is available for us is a lab experiment versus a field experiment. Then we have between subjects and within subjects experiments. Then measurement of mediation experiment. They are my favorite, by the way. Sequential mediation experiment. That's what I call sequential meds. And I call moderators also mods. I have a separate video on mods and meds. Pre and post measurement experiment is another type of an experiment that you can run. And the last one that I will talk about in this channel is two-phase versus one-phase experiment. Now, that may all look very confusing and overwhelming, but there is a clear distinction between each type of the experiment and when it should or should not be used. And that goes back to your research purpose. What is it that you are trying to look at and you're trying to measure? And it also has some other aspects that will allow you to easily differentiate between all of these types more easily. And here they are. When we look at an experiment versus a quasi experiment, the key difference here is randomization, whether participants were randomly or non-randomly assigned to experimental conditions. When we look at lab experiment versus field experiment, this is about how much control you have as a researcher during the administration of your experiment. When we look at between subjects versus within subjects design, this is about how participants are assigned to the groups and conditions of your experiment. When we talk about measurement of mediation experiment, that is about whether you have a mediator in your conceptualization of the experiment and in terms of what you are actually measuring. If you're not sure what a mediator is, I have a separate video specifically dedicated to mediation. Sequential mediation experiment is about whether you have several mediators in your conceptual framework and in the measurement of your experiment. Pre and post measurement experiment is about you examining the direction of the change in your dependent variable and measuring with more precision the actual change in the dependent variable observed due to the variations in your independent variable. Finally, the two-phase versus one-phase experiment is about at how many points in time did you actually collect your experimental data. Now, looking at this classification that I have on the screen, you may wonder which of them are mutually exclusive and which ones can actually overlap. I would say that the experiment versus a quasi experiment is mutually exclusive. You either pick one of them. Lab experiment versus field experiment is another classification where you have to pick one. And between subjects versus within subject is another type where you may have to choose between in subject design or within subjects design. That also means that you may run an experiment which you've actually done in a lab, and it's between subjects experiment, and you're measuring mediation, and you've collected all your data in one phase. So it's possible for some of the classifications of the experiment that I have on the screen for you is to actually overlap. And I have a separate dedicated video for each of these type of experiments. And I encourage you to watch all of them so that you understand the difference between them in more detail.